Hello and welcome to Armanino's webinar today on handling the COVID-19 disruption for cannabis and hemp companies. Before we get started, I would like to go over briefly how to use your webinar console today. On your console on the right side of your screen, you should see a control tray. You can toggle it open using the red arrow, and at the bottom of that control tree screen, you'll see a chat window. Using that chat window, feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout today's webinar, and we will get to as many of them as we can live today, and anything that needs to be answered beyond that, we can definitely reach out as well. And as usual, we will be able to share the recording and the slides with everyone on today's webinar after it. So if you'd like to reference them again or share them with any colleagues who couldn't make it live today, we'll be able to provide those towards the end of the webinar as well. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy Suharski on our team to get us started.
Thanks, Megan, and good morning, everybody. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend a little bit of time with us and learn more about what's happening out in the world, really in response to COVID, and specifically how it's impacting the cannabis and the hemp industry. So before we dive in and really spend the bulk of our time talking about those impacts and what you could be thinking about with your organizations, did just want to give you, for those that might be new to Armanino, a quick snapshot of who we are and where we sit in the marketplace. I always like to begin with talking about our purpose, because I think this is something that makes us very unique. And our purpose is to be the most innovative and entrepreneurial firm that makes a positive impact on the lives of its clients, people, and communities. And we really live that day in and day out. And wanting to be the most innovative and entrepreneurial firm really is what has led us to the cannabis industry. We've been working in cannabis for quite a long time now. One of the first firms, full service CPA firms, to enter this space. As you can see here, the 20th largest CPA and consulting firm in the country, over 1,500 employees. And really, we have the ability to hit that full breadth of services that any cannabis or hemp organization is going to need. Across the bottom there, you can see recognitions and awards. Really, what I like to highlight is the ones that really speak to our people, the best of the best, inside public accounting, top 100 firms, best places to work, etc. What does this really mean? It means that we've got fantastic employees that join our firm, and ones that stay with us for a very long period of time, that build those deep relationships with their clients, bringing that recurring knowledge to the table day in and day out to help you solve your biggest challenges. So Megan, let's go ahead and jump ahead one slide. All right. And as I mentioned, we really have that depth and breadth to service across the board, really any need that you might have. And really the other thing to highlight here is that we can work with you not just in one phase of your growing company. We work with companies that are very small startup, whether it be outsourcing their back office to us and handling all of their HR and accounting outsourcing as they start to grow, and if they have complex tax and audit needs for various contractual covenants, et cetera. We have the ability to service those from a consulting perspective, helping with strategy and transformation initiatives, and helping you scale your organization with the appropriate systems, helping you expand all the way up to and including organizations. And we're seeing this a lot, unfortunately, today, organizations that have to exit the market. Whether it be something that's planned from a succession perspective, or as we're seeing with a lot of the disruption in the wake of C-19, we're seeing a lot of organizations need to exit earlier than they had originally planned. So a lot of ability across the full spectrum, the full life cycle of your organization. So let's jump ahead one more here, Megan. And I'm going to hand it over to Chris to take us through some of those services that I've already touched on here a little bit.
Yeah, so Chris Lee, manager, part of our consulting practice in the cannabis industry. So just high level, we are a full servicing cannabis provider focusing on audit, tax, consulting, and risk assurance and advisory. What makes us unique and best and only is that we provide all of these services, drilling down into audits, financial statement audits, reviews, compilations, tax, corporate tax, outsourcing, individual tax planning for your needs individually in cannabis, and then also for your business. Consulting, technology consulting, management consulting, CFO advisory consulting, and then risk assurance and advisory, cybersecurity, internal audits, and compliance. And really looking at and providing this holistic view to the cannabis industry makes our firm unique and able to help you at in any walks of your strategic journey, as Jeremy previously presented, or any stage in your life cycle.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Chris. Well, as we jump ahead, you've heard a couple voices here. We want to pause really quickly just to introduce ourselves so you know who you're going to be speaking with today. As Megan mentioned when we kicked off, my name is Jeremy Suharski. I'm a partner in our consulting practice. I joke that I'm a recovering auditor. I spent 15 years in the risk and compliance space, focusing on public company compliance, internal controls, which lends very well to the cannabis space. This past year, I've been working on our strategy and transformation team, working very closely with Chris. And really focused on how we bring leading edge solutions and best and only solutions from a technology perspective to our cannabis clients. Mike, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Mike Gorell. I lead the cannabis tax practice for Armanino. And one thing that really makes us a little bit unique in the tax area is that we service clients across the country and in Canada. And I've got one client in Jamaica as well. So we certainly work with many different types of companies from seed to sale in all states, even though the firm is mainly based in California. Chris?
Yeah, again, Chris Lieu, manager, part of our consulting practice, specifically focusing on management consulting in strategy and transformation. So, focusing on developmental growth, organizational growth of cannabis companies, and what technology they need to support those growth initiatives.
Fantastic, and thank you for those introduction, guys. So what are we going to be covering in the webinar today? So we're going to be talking about the CARES Act, specifically what are the government aid benefits that cannabis and hemp companies can be looking to. When the CARES Act rolled out, just shy of 800 pages. That was a lot of information to digest, and a lot of different reports coming out about access to PPP loans and SBA and how the banks are going to be supporting, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll be walking through what are some of those considerations. Thinking about your human capital, what you need to be thinking about from an HR perspective as you evaluate your human capital and potentially right size given some of the challenges. We're going to be touching on internal controls, and one area too, which has really seen a pretty rapid rise here in the last 2 months around cybersecurity. And while you look at a lot of the sort of cybersecurity issues and risks around the world and say, gosh, do these really apply to a very cash-based business like cannabis? It absolutely does. And we'll hit on some examples of what's been happening there and really what companies need to be thinking about. The last area where we're going to focus on is really stop looking sort of backwards as to what the impact has been of C-19 and start thinking ahead. As we've rolled into, what I heard a great term for is the new abnormal. How do we make sure that we're ready for this, operating in this environment and thinking further ahead to make sure that our business is future ready? So then, Megan, if we could jump ahead one. So really, what's this looking like, the last 2 months now? Here in California, I think we're on day 52 or 53 of shelter in place. A lot of individuals voluntarily started to shelter in place, prior to the official announcement. So what's really been the impact? The great part is the list of essential businesses that came out initially in many states did not include cannabis. There was public pressure, and then very, very rapidly, if it was not already deemed an essential business, it was added to that list. And the great part to see was it was the entire supply chain. So not just, retail dispensaries and whatnot, but all the way back up into agriculture as well. So fantastic to see that this was recognized as something that not only for recreational but for medical purposes as well was essential. What you then saw from there is a pretty impressive uptick in sales across the board, and in most cases, not just for March, but it carried into April. Across most jurisdictions. In some cases, there were stories that I had personally read. You see the hoarding people, lining up at Costco, and I've got to have, 9 years worth of toilet paper. Well, the cannabis industry was hit in a very similar way. There was one dispensary in Southern California had a report where one individual in one visit, had more than $1,500 of product that he walked out with. As part of this, hey, we don't know when we're going to be back. We don't know what the reaction is going to be. So let's go ahead and take care of ourselves while we can. So as I mentioned, a lot of companies saw record sales in March. And the great part is laws, regulations, and guidelines for how cannabis companies, specifically retailers, can interact with their clients inside of their physical business, et cetera, really have been adjusted to adapt to this new model around delivery and curbside pickup and a lot of things in some locations that would not have been legally feasible. Have now been adjusted to adapt to this new normal and allow their customers to obtain their products in appropriate ways. Chris or Mike, any thoughts on what else you guys have been seeing in the market thus far, really in reaction to C19 that might build off of what I've already presented there?
Yeah, I think really looking at, the curbside pickup allowances is really a big process change of how dispensaries now sell their product. Additionally, in manufacturing or distribution, internally there had to be some process changes as well. Making sure people are in compliance with the 6 feet apart, making sure your policies and procedures are in place to abide by these new rules and regulations, and also too, working from home, the whole remote work environment. So if our accounting team is located elsewhere outside of the dispensary or the manufacturing realm, what does the remote work environment look like as well? So those processes and how we communicate have changed and impacted that the cannabis industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. So as we think about what some of these reactions have been, and we fast forward and say, really, what's the impact going to be? Sort of, both short-term as long-lasting impacts. The first one that we're seeing already is we've got strong sales really across the board that have, again, maintained not just in March during this sort of, hey, we're getting ready to shelter in place, but throughout the shelter in place across most states. Sales continue to be very, very strong. But as Chris alluded to, it's required some very fundamental shifts in business models. In one case, I was speaking with an organization that said, hey, we had to very quickly take all of our bud tenders and turn them into delivery drivers. Okay, great. Well, that seems on the surface very straightforward. Instead of standing behind a counter, you're now delivering product to various locations. But what does that mean from a logistics perspective? What does it mean from a human safety perspective? Are we able to do this in a very contactless way where we're keeping our employees safe the way we could if they were in the physical business? And things like insurance liability and whatnot for having these individuals on the road. So you're seeing some of these kind of shifts that are very fundamental to changing the business. The second one here really is around cash flow. And while sales have been up, there's a lot of speculation around market consolidation, which is another point we've got here as well. And not having the appropriate cash flow or cash reserves on hand in sort of best in class is really looking at 12 to 18 months. If you don't have those 12 to 18 months of cash reserves sitting on your balance sheet, really are you going to be able to weather the storm? Because again, there's so much unknown as this unfurls. You look at this, the middle of the United States with a lot of states opening up, a lot of protests, but then you look at on the coast, many states still have pretty restrictive lockdowns. So having that cash to weather the storm is really going to be critical. That's also having an impact on the market as a whole and how it's viewed from a valuation perspective. Valuations were already flat coming into C19, and as we adapt to this new kind of environment, expectations from analysts are that it's going to continue to remain flat. And then last but not least, the market consolidation started happening, late last year in earnest. And the expectation is that, those organizations that really have sort of best in class financials, meaning, strong cash reserves, strong investors, multi-state operators, et cetera, are really going to be in an exceptional position to take advantage and really drive additional market consolidation here. You saw some of the initial sort of big plays late last year, around Cresco Labs and Canna Royalty, as well as others. So really, a lot of these sort of far-reaching impacts really are expected coming out of C19. And really, if thinking about it, through the lens of COVID-19 really being that accelerant that's really going to take and move these things forward very, very quickly. So what can we do about it? So we've talked a little bit about, hey, this is what's been happening. These are some of the projected long-term effects of it. So what can we be doing? What can you be doing specifically to make sure that you're future ready? So I'm going to hand it over to Chris. We're going to talk a little more about disruption and then specifically how we can handle some cash forecasting as well as HR issues.
Yeah, so to Jeremy's point about what can we do about it, it's really taking a step back and not being so reactive to this sudden change, but being able to adapt to the change and really looking at what was our overall plan in the beginning and understanding how this change will impact our go-to plan or our plan that we previously developed. So, what are we doing in the short term, midterm, long term range, and how is that going to impact us? And what do we need to do to adapt our strategic plan? What are other initiatives that we might need to start to be able to still meet our goals that we projected in the beginning of the year, but we might approach them in a different way. So for example, like deliveries, if we have a dispensary, right, we needed to change our whole delivery method as people can't come into the store, right? So changing our bud tenders into delivery people, or creating new partnerships with Ease or Weed Maps or other distribution channels to be able to get our products to the people who still need them. But it's just in a different way. And that still rolls back up to meeting our overall strategic plan and goal, but it really boils down to understanding that. Next area is embracing technology so providing on-demand information, streamlining operations to be able to move and pivot quickly and get that information so we're making knowledgeable decisions about how to move and pivot. So having a fully integrated technology eco stack, having fully developed cash flow, and being able to make logical decisions on plans to move forward that won't cripple us based off of any times or changing times such as the COVID, but really moving forward to meet still our strategic plan and having that information being brought upon us from technology. Increasing efficiency. I mean, now it's more valuable than ever to be as efficient as possible. In some areas we might have had to make layoffs, and now we need to get the same amount of work done with fewer people. So it's very, very important to be as efficient as possible. So to my last point, leveraging technology to create that efficiency, and then also, what are waste areas or wasted process areas that we're having to constantly rework or constantly go back and ask repetitive questions or going through certain approval steps. These all lead to latency and lag in our processes, which costs us money. And it wouldn't be delivering our product as fast as we could to the customer, no matter what vertical we're in, on the cultivation side, distribution, manufacturing, or on the dispensary side. Also, what we need to take a look at is adding value. How are we still going to add value with this change to our end customer? Keeping the customer's needs in mind through any source of change is super important. We want the customer to still be paying for the value that we are offering and the items, and we don't want them paying for back office services that are inefficient, for example, or for areas of waste that aren't delivering the service that we intend to the customer. So we really need to think of all of our processes and organizational steps that add value to the end customer. And the last thing is reducing uncertainty. So I touched on this before, but structured decision making and processing with all the facts. I mean, we want to make sure that we aren't in a reactive stage when something changes. We've already had a plan or developed a plan to be able to adapt to this change and go through a decision-making process to make sure that we're really addressing this change and addressing what is best for the business and the customer at the end of the day. Great. So another area that is very, very important to focus on is cash is still king, right? So a lot of transactions are still happening hand to hand through cash, no matter what stage in the vertical you're in. So the benefits of having a well-developed cash forecast, I mean, is immense when trying to make business decisions of what we need to do and how we need to react in the future. So developing a cash forecast, I listed up just some benefits for having a cash forecast. I mean, it's a central area of information to where we can make these decisions, quick decisions, and informed decisions moving forward. Investors are probably asking questions with how we're reacting, how's our cash flow, and this is a way to send to them, hey, we have it under control. This is what our plan is. This is what we're planning for the future, and these are key decisions that we're making out of this cash flow. Also, it hits on certain growth planning metrics if we're thinking of bringing in a new line or we're thinking of partnering with a new distribution channel. That could forecast out as well and show positive or negative benefits of such an activity. Improving relationship management, so seeing any vendors that are late on payments, what's the lag time there, what do we need to do to improve that, to improve our cash flow. And the last one is forecasting is cheaper than failing, right? So this is part of developing this plan, and a cash forecast is the proper planning, or it is the proper planning metric to develop a succinct and bulletproof plan, and it is cheaper than failing and losing a significant amount of revenue or the business.
Yeah, Chris, and I think the key thing here to highlight is really sort of the best-in-class process is looking at a 13-week rolling cash forecast. It's not a point-in-time activity, and admittedly, a lot of organizations I've worked with historically have looked at sort of cash flow modeling as sort of a, hey, we'll get to it when we get to it type of thing. The business is strong, we've got revenue flowing in, for the most part, our receivables look good, et cetera. We're not really hurting. But really what this sort of crisis has brought to the forefront is this strong requirement to say, no, we need to be looking at where our cash burn is, on a very frequent basis, to really make sure, to Chris's point, we've got all of the right details around planning. And do we need to be trimming costs? Do we need to be making adjustments? Do we need to be delaying expenses? Do we need to be renegotiating things like leases, and taking advantage of anything inside any benefits inside of those contracts? So really looking at it on that rolling 13-week basis is going to be critical, and getting it to where it could be somewhat systematic based on your best-in-class systems that you may already have in place, and not stitching it together with Excel, Google Sheets, etc.
Yeah, excellent point, Jeremy. And another area to think about is handling HR matters. So our businesses, we might have had to make some difficult decisions based on the times, through either layoffs, reducing individuals' hours, reducing pay. These are all very, very difficult, especially with employees that we might have worked with for years and years of having to have these discussions. But a few areas and few key highlights to touch on with handling particular HR matters is important. So hiring and terminating employees. I mean, we might still need to hire certain individuals during this time, and it's really important, since there is more remote environment, that communication is high. Bringing these people on board, making sure they feel welcome, and making sure that we have appropriate onboarding processes in place, like electronic doc signing, and checklists in our onboarding or HRIS system that has the particular key information that we need to check off to make sure we're covered when hiring these individuals on a more remote basis, right? There's going to be less face-to-face meetings or no face-to-face meetings in some cases, so we need to make sure that we're getting all the required information. And then also terminating employees, we need to make sure that we have all of the exit documentation and making sure that it is succinctly documented. Final wages, benefits, and unemployment info, because that could be used, in the future for any unemployment claims moving forward. HR communication, so communicating with your employees often of what's happening, what's the current stage in the business that we're in, what are we looking for to do in the future in terms of headcount, and what our plan is to slowly move back into our normal working patterns, or make other adjustments for more remote working patterns or certain policies, procedures, and processes that might need to be updated as a result of COVID-19. I just touched on this. So remote working environments, just some key tips for that is communicate regularly, having constant team meetings, making sure that everybody feels involved, and is still able to feel a part of the team, is very, very important. And then also, from a manager or CFO, CEO perspective, knowing what they're working on, right? Making sure that we're setting goals and holding them accountable, knowing that we're still moving forward to our end strategic goals that we set up in the beginning of the year. Working remotely shouldn't stop any of that, and we should be holding our employees accountable to make sure they're doing the work. And that goes to the point of focusing on the output. What are we really trying to accomplish? And let's try to get to that that end goal. Next is the use of timesheets. So I know we all hate timesheets. I know Jeremy and Mike, we have to fill out timesheets, and we personally don't like it, but it's super important during this time. So it's a requirement now in COVID-19 times to track extra sick time or leave time if it's related to COVID-19, either caring for a family member or caring for yourself. And the days and the weeks an employee pays need to be reported to the government. So this is very, very important to know where this time is spent and how the time is used related to the sick and leave. Lastly, salary reductions in lieu of layoffs. I mean, this is a great alternative instead of laying off your workforce. Either reducing salaries or reducing hours for hourly workers, and making sure not to reduce the days we provide services. So really structuring our days work. So, if a couple people work 4 days, make sure that we're still working the full 5-day working weeks, but a couple people will work Monday through Thursday, and the other couple people work Tuesday to Friday. So making sure that we're still providing services and not completely shutting down for any of these days is super important. And related to salary reductions, I mean, you're going to get a ton of questions from employees moving forward. So making sure to have a plan and pre-thought out questions and responses to those is very, very important.
Yeah, Chris, and as we transition to the next slide here, one thing I just want to hit on as it relates to remote work environments, just as a point of reference, one thing to make sure that you're not losing sight of as well as your employees potentially move from working in some type of physical location, office, dispensary, et cetera, to some type of remote work arrangement, is also making sure that you're being sensitive to any disabilities and needs that those individuals have relative to those disabilities. If you've had to make special work accommodations, whether it be to a physical space, to a work environment, to a schedule, et cetera, making sure that those extend to their remote work environment as well. Personal perspective, my older brother's got a degenerative eye condition where his employer makes some special considerations for the nature of his work environment to allow for his limited eyesight to not impede his work. As they move to a home office situation, it just required them allowing him to have access to some company equipment that he could take home with him. So not a major consideration, but again, thinking about, are there those individuals that may need some special accommodations that are very straightforward for an employer to meet, and make sure that you're not getting yourself into any type of discriminatory hot water as you move to this remote environment as well, is going to be critical for you to be thinking about as well.
Perfect.
All right. So then the question really is, as we think about, what's been happening and we hear relief is on the way. Congress has passed several different pieces of legislation. The CARES Act really being the biggest piece. So everyone says, hey, it's really on the way. And the question mark really is it? So we're going to hand it over to Mike Garral and ask him to step you guys through a lot of the impact of what's been happening from a federal perspective and where the benefits are available to cannabis and hemp organizations. So Mike, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Jeremy. There's been next slide, please. There's been a lot of attention paid to the Paycheck Protection Program. These PPP loans have been very effective for, companies that are outside of the cannabis and hemp business, and they've been making headlines about, how much they've received, and companies like Shake Shack and whatnot have received $10 million, and because of all the attention that was paid to them, they've now returned those funds back to the federal government. And unfortunately, cannabis companies are not eligible to obtain these loans because all of the loans are one way or another administered through the SBA, and the SBA has formally declared that all cannabis companies, because of their federal illegality under Schedule 1, are not eligible to obtain these loans. However, hemp companies are a different matter. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, those companies are fully legal, and therefore they can obtain these loans. And I've heard of a North Carolina hemp company, I think received 1.5 million. A San Diego hemp company, I believe, received 2 million plus. So there are companies that are getting these loans, but it really depends on what sort of relationship you have with your banker. I'm hearing stories that companies that have a really good balance sheet and have a strong relationship with their banker are getting these loans, and other companies that have kind of shunned away from the major banks and working with maybe smaller institutions are having a more difficult time in getting those loans. But it's out there for hemp, but unfortunately not available for cannabis, despite a lot of lobbying efforts being done by several cannabis organizations to try to change that. But as of today, they're still ineligible. Next topic I want to talk about are net operating losses, and NOLs under the CARES Act for losses that were incurred in 2018, 19, or 20 can be carried back now for 5 years. And this can be a very big benefit to both cannabis and hemp companies, because going back 5 years, most of these companies haven't been in operation for 5 years, and so this allows them to go back to basically when they first started doing business, and can be very important for them. One of the things to consider about this is that you need to do some modeling about the NOLs, because it sounds easy, just go back and you carry back NOLs, but you want to take a look and see if there's method changes that would generate additional NOLs. Are there certain write-offs for bad debts that became worthless? You would want to take that into account as well. I know a number of companies have been working with other cannabis businesses, and they haven't paid them, and they're not going to pay them. They've gone out of business or something. And so now that those debts are worthless, we can go back and make adjustments and include that in the return, and therefore increase maybe the NOLs that the company faced. So some of the other things that I'm going to be talking about later on will also impact your NOL and maybe increase them. So you really want to kind of go through all of this and make sure that you're capturing everything that you're entitled to, so that you can make the most of this program. Next item is the Family First program. And this really kind of piggybacks from the Family Leave Act. And it allows employers to basically pay their employees their full salary or income for up to 12 weeks if the employee is not able to come to work because maybe they have the virus themselves, could be that they're taking care of someone that has the virus, or in many cases, children are not going to school because their schools are closed and they have to be schooled from home, and so they're a minor child and they have to be taken care of by someone, and so the employee has to stay home and take care of their minor child. So the good thing about this is that the next thing here that I have, the employee retention credit, is really a funding mechanism for the Family First program. And by completing certain forms and doing certain things to indicate that you're paying this employee under the Family First program, this allows the employer to get reimbursed 100% of those employees that are not working under the Family First program. So I think it's something really worth considering. And again, the PPP program has gotten so much attention, but there's all these little things out there that any one of them may not be the magic bullet that's going to help your company, but adding some of these things together can really have a significant impact on your company. Next item I have is the deferral of Social Security payments. And this is something where, Social Security payments, the employer pays 6.2% of the employee's salary to Social Security. And this has now been deferred so that any Social Security payments due from the March 28th period through December 31 of this year are now deferred to 2021 and 2022, which means that you don't make any Social Security payments through the end of the year, and then you don't have to pay those Social Security amounts until 50% of it is due by the end of December of 2021, and the other 50% is due by December 31 of 2022. So it's really another area that you should consider and spend some time looking at to make sure that you take advantage of that situation. And obviously there's forms and things that need to be completed in order to effectuate this. And so just don't defer it and not do anything, but make sure you're completing the forms to implement this. Next item I have is the qualified improvement property. This allows you to restore to a 15-year depreciation life with bonus depreciation. And again, another area that could help you increase your NOLs that would be carried back. Consider amending your 2018 return for this new legislation, or you may want to instead catch up and make an adjustment on your in your 2019 return for this amendment. Now, keep in mind that this is only for property that is an interior improvement and not exterior improvements. So those cannabis companies that are an indoor grow, for example, would certainly want to take advantage of this new accelerated depreciation benefit. The next item I have is the deductibility of interest expense. For 2020, all businesses may utilize 50% of their adjusted taxable income limit and may elect to use 2019 or 2020 as their adjusted taxable income for the calculation. But one thing that is kind of a trick here that you want to keep in mind is the fact that this applies to corporations, and partnerships have to follow a separate rule. If you're a partnership, then you're still limited to 30% of your adjusted taxable income limit, but the partners can deduct 50% of the 2019 disallowance on their 2020 tax return with no income tax limitations, and then the remaining 50% of the disallowed amount will follow the new 50% adjusted taxable income limit in 2020. So, keep in mind that there's some, differences there between corporations and flow-through entities for this interest expense provision. The next item I have is the corporate minimum tax is accelerated. Under the CARES Act, this allows corporations to claim 100% AMT credits in 2019, and it provides an election to take the entire refundable credit amount in 2018. This, the last item over there is just a repeat of, I think, what I had before and is a typo, but let me talk a little bit about charitable contributions. One of the things that I've seen a lot of cannabis companies do is, contribute hand sanitizers to medical personnel, as well as face masks and whatnot. And it's been a great thing to see the industry kind of come together and really help in this time of need. There's been some changes in the deductions you can take for charitable contributions. If you make a cash contribution, then the limitation has increased from 10% to 25% of your taxable income. But if you make a cash contribution, it increases from 10 to 25%. But if you only make contributions of like hand sanitizers and other tangible personal property, then you still are limited to the 10% rule. So, be mindful about that. And there's a difference between giving in cash and giving in tangible personal property. And one final thing that I'll speak about before I let you move on is talked a lot about the federal consequences here. From a state tax perspective, all bets are off basically, because the states generally do not follow the Fed in most instances. There are a few states that automatically adjust their tax code to whenever the federal tax code changes, but those are very few. Most states, go their own way. And I suspect that because of the loss of revenue from sales tax and other means, they're going to be under pressure to, stick to their guns, if you will, in terms of not adopting a lot of these provisions from a state tax standpoint. Now, keep in mind, in California, I've got a couple of things to mention real quickly. Governor Newsom announced in April that there are $50,000 bridge loans that are available to California companies, and that's something that you should certainly consider and look into. And then most localities haven't announced any sort of assistance programs, but San Francisco has a few of them out there. So if you are a business in the San Francisco jurisdiction, you might want to take a look at some of the incentives that they have available to companies based in their locale. And with that, I'm going to toss it back over to Jeremy.
Yeah, and that was a great update, Mike. Lots of things for companies to consider as it relates to the various tax implications. Not only what can be deferred, what can be omitted, et cetera, but just a lot of great stuff there. So, really building off of that, there's a lot of not only tax considerations, but it really comes back to as I mentioned, as a recovering auditor, what I'll say is the internal controls impact and a lot of those baseline processes that have those various checkpoints that are going to go mitigate risk. And a lot of those very much are related to some of the benefits that Mike is speaking to. But if we look at it, various areas of internal controls we've got to be thinking about, not only just the baseline compliance activities, but a big one to highlight really is around employee training and making sure that your standard operating procedures are up to date, they're communicated, and they're acknowledged by your employees, especially in the face of sort of an evolving workplace. Whether you're moving to remote work environments, whether you're shifting fundamental job duties. I used the example previously of bud tenders now moving into delivery driver roles, making sure that they're appropriately trained for a variety of reasons: compliance with laws and regulations, compliance with your any insurance coverages you may have, et cetera. But really making sure that your employees are put in a position to be successful and mitigating risk to the company. The second one here, the third item here, maintaining your licenses, making sure that that baseline of renewing your licenses on an annual basis across the various components of your business is going to be critical, and making sure that you understand if there's any disruption from a state or county or city agency perspective. They're all working in many cases on reduced schedules, essential components of the government only, and making sure that if you have payments that are coming due, if there's questions, disputes, et cetera, that you're looking at that early and often to make sure that you're not going to be caught off guard by not being able to renew those licenses and continue to keep your business operating effectively. Item number 4 here really speaks to making sure your systems are going to be properly working and supporting, especially when it comes to the trace and track requirements. In California, it's metric, and not just making sure your systems are working, but if there's issues, do you still have access to professionals that have subject matter expertise on these platforms? Whether it be, on an in-house basis, if you have in-house IT resources, if you're using third-party resources, getting ahead of the curve here and making sure that you're very clear on where these individuals are operating and how you can tap into those is going to be key. And Megan, if we could build in the next animation there, thank you. Keeping your policies and procedures are up to date is going to be critical. As I mentioned, a lot of the evolution of your business and whatnot, and how you're operating day to day, need to be solidified into those policies and procedures. Number one, to make sure your employees are very clear on what to do, but also to make sure, if you think about some of that remote workforce best practices that Chris had hit on, how are we setting expectations? How are we measuring the outputs, et cetera? A lot of that really starts with the baseline of policies and procedures, and not doing those simply because you have to, but really relying on those as a cornerstone of your business processes. We hit a lot on sales and use tax with a lot of what Mike had spoke to. Records retention, again, if you're working remotely, considering how you are meeting those record retention requirements, relative to whether it be any contractual covenants, investor covenants, or relevant laws, regulations, et cetera. Maybe the last thing to hit here from an internal controls perspective, again, I keep bringing it back to fundamental changes in your business, thinking about what are the risks to your organizations, what are the risks to your employees, and how are you mitigating those. This one here really speaks to the example I've continued to use as we're shifting individuals from behind the counter to behind the wheel. What does that mean from a risk perspective? Does that expose us to undue risk from an insurance perspective? And how are we working to either through individuals own an insurance and how we're going to be subsidizing those? How are we going to be working as an organization to support that? Or are we doing something more at what I'll generically call the corporate level? Thinking about what those changes mean from an internal controls and risk perspective are going to be key. And a big piece of that, as we then springboard into the next slide here, is thinking about what are we doing and what are we thinking about as it relates to cybersecurity. Now, I'll confess that I could speak about cybersecurity until I'm absolutely blue in the face. It's an area I've done a lot of work in. It's an area that I've got a personal passion for. I just find the level of skill to do this well just to be phenomenal. And on the surface, you might say, hey, is cannabis and hemp, are they really exposed to the same type of cyber threats that, an online, B2B marketplace or an online SaaS company would be, or a high-tech manufacturing company? And the answer is both yes and no. Being a cash-based business or industry for the most part, there's not going to be quite as much initial risk from various attack vectors that might impact other companies. But net, cannabis companies have two things all hackers want, which is data and bandwidth. So looking across these various attack vectors and just being thoughtful about how you're protecting yourself. Phishing remains a very big attack vector, a little bit less for the retail side, but very much so for agencies and organizations that have high volumes of personal data, and thinking about really how this industry got its kind of public start, which was around medical use, which is now then shifted to recreational. A lot of the medical use has a lot of personal information that may not be fall under the umbrella of HIPAA, which is the data privacy around personal health records. But looking at it and applying similar concepts to those pieces of data that you may house, making sure that you're applying appropriate due care of those records is going to be key. Ransomware is a big one where hackers will launch an attack, take over and encrypt devices like your POS system and refuse to unlock it until they receive payment. This one is rampant across all industries, including cannabis. Maybe the last one here, because we're going to be closing in on the top of the hour and we've got a little bit more to get through here. The last one I'll hit on is this idea of IoT attacks. IoT is the Internet of Things. And this is really where you've got more and more devices being accessible from the internet. Think about, hey, I want my refrigerator to tell me when my milk is going bad. That's all done through some type of internet sensor, internet-enabled sensor that is sitting in my refrigerator. Well, this is really a vector for attacks specific to cannabis and hemp as well, Because if you think about the amount of video surveillance and security systems to allow for entrance and egress from not only just from your building but from secured areas within your building, and the video cameras that are connected to help support your ongoing security and whatnot. All of these devices are connected to the internet, and all of them have the ability for hackers to penetrate those devices and then traverse your network, meaning move from a video camera potentially to your POS system, to other systems, and use that as a launching point for things like cyber extortion or ransomware. So again, what I would just challenge you is don't take the approach of the ostrich. I'm going to stick my head in the sand and pretend it's not there. While it may not be as big of an attack vector as other organizations, other types of industries, this absolutely is an area that you should not lose sight of, especially in this current environment where we've got folks moving into different locations, leveraging devices in different ways, working in different manners than we maybe had intended. Make sure that you don't lose sight of making sure we're keeping everything secure to keep that business up and running. So with that said, let's continue to sort of press forward and look at how do we take some of these concepts and stitch them together and really say, how do we take this and make our business future ready? So Chris, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And I think that's a good point. A lot of these topics that we've touched on are more tactical approaches that roll up into our overall business strategy, but we really need to align of, is this the right strategy and is this the right tactic to take towards our business strategy? So as I mentioned before, understanding the change. Understanding the change is really understanding how your strategy is going to react to this change. So reviewing and revamping your business strategy when change occurs is necessary. Most of the time, our strategies don't need to change that drastically. There might be tactical approaches that change based off, or that need to be adjusted based off of this change, but our overall strategy should stay the same. And this is just a high-level view of a balanced scorecard approach that we like to take with our clients when we do overall strategic sessions. I'm sure most of you have plans in place, strategic visions in place, but making sure that everything is aligned of what you want to tactically attack in the near future really rolls up to that overall core vision and strategy. So just working inward out, I mean, really establishing what is your vision and what is your strategy and what is your mission and purpose as a company. Then you could go through and assess and pick out different strategic objectives, creating a map, a roadmap to obtain those, any performance measures, target metrics, and then evaluating if you meet those. And really the four main buckets that we like to focus on is learning and growth. So this is really the people side of the change. So how are we as a company on the people side going to meet these strategic goals? Do we need more training? Do we need to hire more people? Do we need a cultural shift? That's really what we need to focus on for learning and growth. The customer. So we should always have the customers, as our top priority in mind. So how are we going to obtain new customers? What's our sales strategy to obtain new customers? For internal processes, like I mentioned before, technology, optimization of business processes to create better efficiency. That should be a core area. And then lastly is the financial. So are we going to meet our revenue goals? What do we need to do to meet that? Do we need to scale to new locations? And this could all be related back to whatever change we're going through. So in COVID, yeah, there might be some adjustments to tactics. Hey, we might not be able to open up this new location, or we might not be able to make this new contract work. But how are we going to adjust in other areas to maybe still meet that overall performance measure and goal, and still have a positive impact and result at the end of the day? You go to the next slide. And really what we focus on is so technology. Technology is a tool to obtain business strategy. There's a lot more that goes into obtaining an overall business strategy and growth plan, and to be able to scale in times of change, right? We still want to keep moving forward, but technology is a great tool to be able to do that. So looking at any manual processes, any rework steps of how technology can come into play, or we revamp our process to better leverage technology, is what we really want as an outcome. On this in this blue section of after our digitized transformation. So starting from left to right, creating that overall strategy, our business model, our operating model, and putting that to use of how technology could then better optimize that of our operational processes, our business model, the customer experience. And as a result, we get increased efficiency, increased ROI, better customer satisfaction, digital accessibility, better visibility to data to make strategic decisions. And all through this digital transformation, it's not just having a seed to sale software that provides us this information, it's having a holistic tech eco stack. So an ERP for finance and accounting, really looking at better reporting. Are we going to be audit compliant, audit ready? Are we able to present certain reports to investors? Information out of the seed to sale. So I mean, tracking each stage through the process, whatever vertical we're in, we need to have that software in place. And then also for reporting purposes, reporting back to our through Metric or BioTrack, right? For that FP&A, for cash forecasting, making sure we have a good plan in place. How is it going to adjust? How do we look in the future? What's our annual plan? What's our 13-week plan? Leveraging RPA, robotic process automation, for any manual tasks. What could a bot do for me that might be that might take over a human role for some of these manual tasks and others, which is part of this digital transformation. You go to the next slide. And this is just an example of what we're seeing of a tech eco stack of what this digital transformation is. So, having a Sage Intacct or a Microsoft as your core ERP, and having your seed to sale, so MJ Freeway, Trellis, Logix, integrate into these systems, make it a more holistic and visible view for you as a business owner or as a manager, and other solutions. Work, Panacea down at the bottom for payroll. The seed to sale, they integrate into Metric and BioTrack. You have your point of sale solutions and cash management solutions. So Dama Financial, Hyper being one, CRM, Salesforce, WebJoint, SpringBig, and then also your analytics side. So Vena, Solver, Intact does that as well. So being able to streamline this and being able to have on-demand ready reporting and eliminating those waste and leveraging technology, this is the ideal state that we're trying to get to. So I'll pass it back over to Jeremy to close this up and tie a bow all around it.
Oh, a nice, neat bow. And Chris, that was great. Really thinking about some of those forward-looking stuff, and admittedly, a bit of it feels sort of like the motherhood and apple pie and some of the business basics around strategy and whatnot, but I know Chris and I can both attest to the fact how many times we come in to work with organizations that just simply don't do that well. They've got great ideas and great thoughts around how they want to be innovative, how they want to position in the market, but struggle to execute effectively on some of the other strategy components. So really making sure you're focusing on those to be future ready is key. So what did we cover today? We talked about, Mike gave a great update on all the various benefits that the CARES Act, brings to us that we should be thinking about in the cannabis and hemp space. We talked about HR considerations, cash flow forecasting, a lot of those things that the disruption really is driving, how to mitigate risk and key areas to be thinking about there. And last but not least, really enabling your business and moving from this reactive state into this, as I mentioned, this new abnormal. Maybe sometime before we get back to anything that looks like it did from a business and social and economy perspective, anything that looks like it did in 2019 as we rolled into 2020. But again, moving from that reactive into that future ready state is going to be critical as well. Now, with that said, we'll go ahead and use the last couple minutes here if there are any relevant questions comments that we can address. For that, I guess I will ask Megan.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thank you, of course, to Chris and Mike as well. It actually looks like you guys were able to answer most of the questions, but in the interest of time, because I do know that we're right up against the top of the hour here, we can hold any additional ones for offline. And of course, to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for joining our webinar. We will be sharing the recording and the slides from today's webinar with all of you through the link, the emails that you registered with. If you do have any additional questions for Jeremy, Chris, and Mike, or anyone on Armanino's Cannabis and Hemp teams, definitely reach out through our experts at Armanino LLP. I've got the link up there for you. You can reach out through that address and we will definitely get it routed to the right person. And of course, if you're interested in any additional materials for moving beyond and really thriving past COVID, as a cannabis or a hemp company, definitely check out Armanino's COVID Resource Center on our website. There are some additional cannabis specific and hemp specific materials there. And with that, we will close it out. So thank you to our awesome speakers today. And of course, thank you for everyone who joined the webinar live this morning.